All right, what we're going to talk about this evening is the regulations that are in place in the Commonwealth for marketing poultry meat and eggs. And what I'd like to start out with really is the reality of it all. And some of the things we got to remember is that poultry meat and eggs are perishable foods. And with that becomes some responsibilities for preserving not only their freshness and their quality, but also their safety. And we also have to get into our mindset that we are no longer producing eggs or raising chickens. What we're really doing is producing food. And as we go through this evening with all the regulations, you'll see that's what it is. It is about dealing with the perishable food. And no matter how these birds are raised, whether they're raised in conventional or pasture or any other type of operation or by who, there are risks associated with these types of products. And the whole idea of what regulations are in place for is to provide guidance on how can we minimize the risk and make a safe, nutritious product. Along with that is there are legal requirements for it. There are regulatory requirements for it. And we also have a rising social expectation of these products. And for a producer to be successful and move into the marketing end of this production chain, they have to meet all three. They have to meet the legal requirements, the regulatory requirements, and now the social expectation. And with this, our consumer is changing and personal responsibilities are changing. So we have to be extra careful of how we market things, how we preserve things, how we refrigerate things to get the most safe product to the market. And when we look at these regulations, a lot of it nowadays is geared towards food safety. How do we make a safe product? And that's very difficult when you deal with products like poultry meat and eggs because they're very nutritious products. They provide lots of nutrients. Well, they not only provide lots of nutrients for the people that consume them, they also provide nutrients to bacteria that we're trying to control. So we have to work very hard to make sure we put out the best product. Excuse me, but for some reason,
You having trouble, Tony?
I'm having trouble with advancing the slides.
Use your PowerPoint to advance them.
I'm trying to.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. Let's see if I can get it that way. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. So let's start off with egg marketing. And when we market eggs in the state of Kentucky, there are two parts that of regulations and laws that we deal with. One is the egg marketing law that is under the Kentucky Revised Statutes, which authorize the selling of eggs in the Commonwealth. And the other one, excuse me, is the Egg Marketing Program Administrative Regulations, which are part of the Kentucky Administrative Regulations. Taken together, these are the egg marketing law that we follow in the state for providing product for marketing eggs. So if you look into this regulation, the first thing they deal with is an egg handler. Who is a handler? And in their regulations, what they're talking about is a handler means a dealer, a packer, a processor, a wholesaler, a distributor, or a retailer. So everyone that's in the food chain for getting an egg from a producer to the market is an egg handler. And under this law, they first deal with dealers. Dealers means a person, organization, or cooperative engaged in the business of buying eggs and selling them by the case or in quantities to a wholesaler or to a retailer. So they're a person that's not necessarily owning birds, but they're assembling eggs and then selling them to other people. So a lot of times this would be a type of organization that would be a co-op, or it may be a food service place that is assembling and delivering eggs to a retail outlet. Wholesalers means a handler who are engaged in the business of buying eggs from producers and selling or transferring to other dealers, retailers as such. So dealer and wholesaler is probably viewed as more of a larger operation than dealer. But again, it's handling eggs. And then a distributor is a person who sells, offer, otherwise exposes eggs or exposes shell egg to a wholesaler, food services that. So all those are things that probably our producers are not going to deal with, but are things that we deal with in the egg law, because dealers, wholesalers, and distributors are all descriptions that will fit some type of person or operation in that food chain. The one you're probably looking at is the producer. And the producer is any person who exercises control over the production of eggs and disposals from his of the output for his or personally owned flock. So a producer can be anyone that has chickens that are selling eggs or distributing eggs. So it could be as small as a person that has a backyard flock to someone or one of the companies we have in the state that have 4 million birds. They'll all be classified as a producer. A packer is someone that is going to grade the eggs, size the eggs, candle the egg, and packs for sale. And then a retailer would be anybody selling or offering sale of consumers. When you go through all those different types of definitions, you can see that really the producer or the small producer is actually doing many different functions. They may be the packer, they may be the distributor, they may be the retailer, all at the same time. So those are types of things we have to watch as we go forward. In Kentucky, there are some terms for eggs that are not allowed to be sold. And the 4 terms that they use are inedible, leaker, lost, or dirty egg. Now, inedible is unfit for human consumption. So these are eggs that are addled. And if you wonder what addled means, it means that the vitelline membrane or the membrane around the yolk has been broken and the yolk and the albumin has mixed together. We can't sell moldy eggs, and they are very specific that includes black rot, white rot. There cannot be a blood ring, which is the evidence of incubation of the egg. Adhering yolks, where we have yolks stuck to the side. And they do not want bloody whites in the egg or having large amounts of blood in the egg. And eggs cannot be sold if they're incubated beyond blood ring stage. And if there is dirt on the egg. And they are very general about that. We also cannot sell leakers. That's an egg that's cracked or broken in the shell, and the membrane has been exposed, and it's exuding the content of the egg. Leakers are not allowed to be sold. And along the way, we aren't allowed to sell lost eggs. These include eggs that are broken, so the content is leaking. They may have been frozen. They could have been contaminated. They may be an incubator reject, or any of the may have large meat spots or blood spots, and they cannot have any foreign material on it. So those types of things. And then a dirty egg is a shell which is unbroken, has an adhering or foreign material, and a prominent stain covering more than 1/4 of the egg. So if you go through that and you look at inedible, you look at leaker, you look at loss, and you look at dirty eggs, those are all types of things you probably don't want to purchase. And it allows you under the law not to be able to sell them. We also have terms along here is candling. Candling is to look inside the egg, to look at the internal quality. And if you're going to market graded eggs, these eggs have to be inspected by candling, holding an egg up to a bright light. And originally this occurred before electricity, when they used to put it in front of a candle and look at it, and they tried to judge the quality of the interior based on what they see. Candled and graded means just as it says, the egg's been candled and they've been graded. There are 3 grades of eggs in the USDA system: AA, A, and B. And later on, we'll go a little bit over what they are. And then you can also have ungraded and candled, which means that their general run of edible eggs have come from a producer. They've been sized, or they've not been sized or graded, but they've been candled. So all those things are just terms that says we actually looked at the egg. So with that said, now comes down to, under Kentucky law, what is required. And first of all, no person shall buy, sell, trade, traffic, or process eggs in Kentucky without a license issued per se of the egg marketing law. So you need a license to trade, sell. If you handle eggs from in the food chain, you need a license. However, there are a few exceptions. The first exception is hatcheries that are purchasing eggs exclusively for hatching purposes. So if a hatchery is sitting there and they buy eggs from producers to incubate, they don't have to have an egg license, as long as that's the only activity they're doing. Another exception is that hotels, restaurants, or other eating places where eggs are purchased and are served in the establishment do not have to have an egg license. So that means is that if you're a retailer, if you're a restaurant or your hotel, you don't have to have an egg license to buy eggs and to have eggs available for consumption. We also have exemptions for eggs that are used in manufactured products. So things like bakeries, confectionaries, ice cream manufacturers do not have to have an egg license while handling those eggs. The law also exempts consumers that buy eggs for their own consumption from having to have an egg license. So up until this point, it makes sense that you don't have, if you're using them for hatching purchases, or if you're the end user in a food establishment, or you're an end user in a manufacturing process, or the consumer themselves, they don't need a license. The next exemption is one that gives us a lot of confusion when it comes to it. In this particular exemption, it states producers who sell only directly to consumers and do not exceed a sales limit of 60 dozen of eggs per calendar week do not have to have a license. Now, there's some key points to this. One, you have to be a producer. So you have to, and if you go back to that definition, is you had control or you own the chickens that produce the eggs. The next component is that it's directly sold to the consumer. So that means that there is no middleman in there. There's no wholesaler, retailer. You are selling those eggs directly. And then the other one is the amount of eggs, 60 dozens per calendar week. 60 dozens is probably the production between 100 and 150 hens at peak production. So this is a good size, but that is an exemption. It doesn't require the person to buy an egg or have an egg license. Where the confusion is that even though the producer is not required to have an egg license, they still have to meet all of the regulations under the egg marketing laws. So just because you don't have a license doesn't mean you don't have to follow the entire law other than buying that license. And the licensing fees are very reasonable. The retail stores is $20. For any of the other groups, if it's 1 to 25 cases or 1 to 750 dozen, it's $20. Up to 1,500 dozen, it's $30. And over 50 cases or 1,500 dozen, it's $50. So it's a reasonable fee. The license is issued by the the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. So they have a division that deals with regulations and licensing. That is where you apply for a license and pay the fee. Another component of this that few people know about, or few small producers know about, is that all eggs also have an inspection fee or an assessment fee. So eggs that are bought and sold in Kentucky shall bear a 2-cent assessment fee for each 15 dozen shell egg lot or portion area. So a case of eggs will have 4 cents assessment. This goes to the Department of Agriculture to cover the administration and of egg inspection in the state. Now, in most cases, small producers are not going to be asked to pay this, or the amount is going to be so small that the state of Kentucky would spend more money collecting the money than the assessment. But that is in the law, and as successful producers move along the expansion of their flocks, all of a sudden this starts playing into effect, because many times they will then be in retail operations, and that retailer wants the producer to pay the assessment fee. So that fee can be paid for by anyone in the food chain. So it could be by the retailer, the distributor, the producer, and every other stop along the way. But that is in the law. Now, the state, the Commonwealth of Kentucky, has the right, under certain circumstances, to stop the sale of eggs or to pull eggs off the market. And there are certain things that will trigger this to occur. Well, first of all, it's selling or otherwise marketing shell eggs without a license. Very simple. You don't have a license and you're required to have a license, they will have a stop order on your sale. The second thing is selling or marketing eggs without submitting an emergency recall plan. If you sell eggs in the state of Kentucky, you have to have a recall plan filed with the Department of Agriculture. It's part of the licensing procedure and is required. They also can stop payment of eggs if you have not remitted or paid fines that the department issued. They can pull eggs off the market if they're not properly labeled. When we start grading eggs and we try to put a grade in them, there is a set of standards or tolerances that are allowed within each grade. And if you don't meet those, if you say an egg is a AA and it doesn't meet the requirements, they can pull those eggs off the market. The next one is one we run into a lot, especially in farmers markets or places where people are trying to sell eggs and they're small producers. Eggs have to be stored at ambient temperature below 45 degrees. If eggs are stored above 45 degrees, those eggs will be stopped, ordered, and destroyed. Now, in the law itself, it says that it has to be stored in ambient temperature above 45 degrees for a period of 4 hours or more. What becomes tricky is, how do you document 4 hours or more? And what usually happens on the safe side, if they find eggs that are at ambient temperature of more than 45 degrees, they're going to issue a stop order on those eggs. And then any type of contamination or conditions that render the shell egg or egg product unfit for human consumption will also cause them to put a stop order. Again, everything's along with the enforcement of the law, the proper labeling for the consumer. But the important ones that we run into is holding those eggs at proper temperature and keeping the eggs safe. So, if a producer is selling eggs directly to the consumer and they are using just plain egg cartons, the cartons can be labeled as ungraded, which means you have not put a AA, A, or B on it. And this is something I recommend for small producers because you don't want to have to worry about trying to maintain grades and being into tolerance along the way. Also on each carton has to be the producer's name and address, clearly that says produced by, with the producer's name and address, and sold directly to the consumer. This has to be on the top panel of the egg carton. In another part of the law, it says that eggs can also be labeled unclassified. Probably ungraded is probably your best bet. But you got to make sure that the eggs are the producer's name and address on it and that it's sold directly to the consumer. In addition, there's other things in there as well. If you're selling eggs, those cartons also have to have the safe handling label or safe handling statement on it. So they have to have the statement, keep refrigerated at or below 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, you can use the word unclassified as part of instead of ungraded as a way of labeling the carton. The next statement is probably the one people have concerns about. Egg cartons cannot be reused. Eggs have to be sold in a new carton. And the logic behind this is that if you are selling eggs and people are returning eggs, you don't know what was that egg carton exposed to when it was home. You don't know if they decided to use that for holding fly bait or whatever in those cartons, or nails, or whatever you're thinking about. So those are types of things that we want. And the other thing, if you reuse cartons, many times people will try to recycle cartons, and those cartons will have some other producer's name on them or a different date on them. It becomes very hard. But the main one is you don't want to expose those eggs to contamination that you're unsure about. So new cartons are required. Also, you can market eggs in bulk as long as all the information we've talked about already is on a placard, and a person can bring their own container, whether they wanted to bring their own egg box, carton, or their basket. All those things are possible if you are selling eggs. But again, even in eggs in bulk containers have to be refrigerated below 45 degrees. But clearly they have to be identified with all that information. Again, if eggs are being sold and they are in they're graded eggs, the following, they have to have all this information, and even the ungraded eggs have to have it. So you have to have the grade of the egg on there, the size of the egg, and there are official sizes of eggs along the way, or they don't have to have the size on there. They have to have the dealer's name and address, or their plant number, and the date of packing, and an expiration or best buy date. So in many cases, what people will do on their label is put the packing date, and they use either expiration or best buy date. An expiration date are things like EXP or expiration date, sell by date, not to be sold after this date on the end of the case, purchase by, last sale date on the end of the carton, or similar language, noting that these eggs are at that point. And the sell by date or the expiration date is calculated as 30 days from the day the egg was put into that container. And that includes the day of packing. So you have 30 days from the time the egg is in the carton to the point where the expiration date is. In theory, it's probably better those eggs would then have to be pulled. In theory, it'd be better to have a best by date. These are used before, used by, best before, best by, or other language like that. And the dates with this prefix are associated with 45 days from the day of packing, including the day of packing. So for the small producer, it is best, the term I would probably recommend is best buy as the date you use, and it's 45 days from the time the egg comes into the cart. So we talked about grades. So what exactly are the grades? We have AA, A, and B. So when we look at the highest grade is AA. And the things we're going to look at in the egg is the shell, the air cell, the egg white, and the yolk. The first thing in the AA, it's clean, it's unbroken, and practically normal. A AA egg looks like an egg, it's clean, and it's unbroken when we talk about the exterior. The air cell is a pocket of air at the top of the egg that forms when the egg is cooled. And that air pocket forms there. And as the egg ages, it loses moisture and that air cell grows. So if it's less than 1/8 of an inch in depth, it'll be still a AA. The yolk is clear and firm, and if you look at the white is clear and firm, and the outline of the yolk cannot be seen very clearly because the egg white is so thick. And then the yolk is practically free of any apparent defects. So basically, it is a clean egg that looks like an egg. When you open it up, it's going to sit very tight on the plate and have lots of thick albumin and hold the egg up high. When we look at A eggs, the shell quality is still the same. It's clean, it's unbroken, it's practically normal. The air cell can be a little bigger, 3/16 of an egg in depth. the thick albumin or the white of the egg is getting a little less firm, but you can start seeing an egg outline when you candle them. The yolk is free of defects, and it may appear dark because as the albumin thins, the yolk itself is more visible by candling. There's no visual germ shell development. It may show some serious that don't render the egg inedible. And there can be small blood spots and meat spots in the egg. Blood spots and meat spots are part of what happens when either a blood vessel ruptures or a piece of tissue falls off in the oviduct as we are producing eggs. And if they're less than 1/8 of an inch in diameter, those can still be in the A eggs. For B eggs, we start getting into abnormal shapes of the shell. There might be a slight amount of staining. And that means that it's less than 1/3 for a slight stain or less than 1/16 of the egg for a scattered stain. The air cell becomes much bigger. It can't be more than 3/8 of an inch in depth. It may show unlimited movement. It just be a much bigger air cell. The white is going to be watery. And the way you can tell if the white is watery is that you can clearly see the outline of the yolk. And because of that, the yolk may appear dark. And the things we're worried about, again, is that the meat spots or blood spots may be present, but again, they can't be 1/8 of an inch there. So really what we're looking at is the shell, we're looking at the air cell, we're looking at the albumin in the yolk. And as you can see, for the small producer, as they're trying to candle eggs and put a grade on an egg, it becomes quite complicated for it. So with the egg, we have the egg law itself. What you come up with is that there are exemptions for producers that produce small quantities, but they are required only to have that exemption. They only sell directly to the consumer. If they sell to a retailer, a restaurant, any other type other than a consumer, they have to have an egg license no matter the size of the flock or the amount of eggs they're handling. We have to keep our eggs at 45 degrees or lower ambient temperature. We have to have a properly labeled egg carton that states the producer, then the producer's contact information. They have to clearly label when the egg was packed and the best buy date. So that is an overview of how we can market eggs. That is what the law says. Those are what the regulations are in place. Well, let's move on to poultry meat. Now, poultry meat is a little different than eggs because eggs kind of come contained in their own container. Poultry meat is much more having to do with actual processing. Nobody wants to buy a chicken with their feathers on or their intestines in place. So we have to have a process in place to remove feathers, remove the inedible parts, and produce a consumer-ready product. That's where it becomes difficult because poultry meat is regulated by the United States government, USDA, as well as the local governments. In USDA, there is a stated exemption for certain types of operations. They are exempt people who slaughter from the poultry Inspection Act. They exempt people that slaughter or process poultry for personal use. Or custom slaughter and processing for personal use. They also have some requirements for producer growers of not more than 1,000 birds in a calendar year, or some other requirements for producers not more than 20,000 birds in a calendar year, or other people that produce them for meals and processing on the 20,000, or small entrepreneurs that are using the carcasses in processing. They also have exemption for retail stores and restaurants. This is one that a lot of people think, because these are exemptions in the law at the federal government, that they don't have to follow the law. Exempt operations are only exempt from the continuous bird-to-bird inspection and the presence of an FSIS inspector. That's a food safety inspection service during slaughter of poultry and processing poultry products. However, they must follow all other requirements of the Poultry Products Inspection Act. So these exemptions exist, and they are there, but it doesn't exonerate or allow a person to do anything outside of that Poultry Products Inspection Act. And there are requirements for this then. And the reason I'm telling you this is for people that are doing their own processing for their own use, or a custom processor for personal use, retail and restaurants. The poultry is the 6 requirements is that poultry is healthy when slaughtered. The slaughtering processing are conducted under sanitary standards, practices, and procedures to produce poultry products that are sound, free, and fit for human food. The poultry is not mislabeled, identified they're identified as an exempt product and is labeled. The business operates only under one of the exemptions during a calendar year. The product cannot bear the official USDA mark of inspection, and the poultry products do not move in interstate commerce. So healthy birds, sanitary processing, they're identified correctly. The business operates under one of the exemptions. They can never have the official USDA wholesome inspection mark, and they are not to be sold interstate. However, in Kentucky does not recognize the USDA exemptions for the 1,000 and 20,000 birds exemptions. Okay, and the state of Kentucky does not recognize those USDA exemptions. They do recognize the restaurant, the retailer, the personal use ones. But the ones that involve that exemption for those bird numbers, they do not recognize. So poultry that is not inspected under USDA is regulated by the food safety branch of the Department of Public Health. Okay? So when people think they're exempt from inspection because USDA has those on it, that is not true in the case of Kentucky. Poultry that is sold to consumers, retail, restaurants, schools, or other institutions must be either processed at a USDA plant or at the mobile processing unit or at a food safety branch approved food manufacturing plant for poultry. Let me repeat that. If you're selling to consumers, retail, restaurants, schools, institutes, the product has to be produced either in USDA, the MPU, or an FSB approved food manufacturing plant. So what are the USDA plants? We have a few small USDA plants in Kentucky that producers can use for processing their birds. They operate under the same guidelines as the large processing plants we have in the state. So they are USDA improved. They meet all the requirements of that Poultry Inspection Act, and they meet all the requirements for bird-to-bird, bird-by-bird inspection, and they have an FSIS inspector on site. The advantage of doing that is that product can move across state lines. So you're not limited to your marketing ability. It can be sold anywhere. So it can be sold in any type of operations. It can go into restaurants, schools, prisons, any type of thing you want to sell them to. And because they're USDA, your birds don't have to be processed in a plant in Kentucky. They can be processed at any USDA plant that is located that's in the United States. And that product would be able to be marketed in Kentucky. And more importantly, that product is qualified to carry the USDA inspection mark for wholesomeness. So those are the advantages. You can move that product wherever you need. The disadvantage is probably it has a higher cost, and there's only a limited number of capacity that we have at those USDA plants to process chickens and turkeys and other poultry. The mobile processing plant's been in operations for many, many years, and it's a joint effort of the Kentucky State University, Kentucky Department of Agriculture, the Food Safety Branch of the Department of Public Health, and the University of Kentucky. The way this works is that is a facility. It's been approved. If someone wants to use, they go through a training program and get certified to be the facility manager. Each facility manager has their own operational number, and that operational number will be on labels that are approved by the Food Safety Branch. And that product that's processed through the mobile processing plant can be sold anywhere in the Commonwealth to any type of location. There is no interstate movement of that product because it's not USDA. It cannot move between states. The downfall is that mobile processing plant in regards to poultry has to have a docking station where we have 2 or 3 in the state where that trailer or that plant can go to. The producer in this situation is the operator. They're responsible for the operation. They're responsible for providing labor. They're responsible for packaging, and they're responsible for product storage. So everything in there, there's the responsibility of that facility manager. The good part is that the cost of using that of that plant or that processing unit is much less than going through a USDA plant. In this situation, the producer is responsible for the inspection of the birds. So the every bird inspection is done by the producer. And in that operation and the manual with it outlines the standard operating procedures, the standard sanitation operating procedures, HACCP plan, and a recall plan in place, so that all the types of operations that are done are outlined in that manual, and they have to be followed. It is no different than what we would do at a USDA plant. The same documents, the same manuals are created for that mobile processing unit, and just like it was a USDA plant. And if you're not familiar, HACCP is a hazardous analysis critical control points. Basically what that does, it identifies all the potential hazards that are available or could occur, and there's a plan of action. So an example would be if a product doesn't reach below 40 degrees in a set period of time, what are the corrective actions we can take along the way to get it there? What is a new wrinkle in this, because there have been requests, this food safety branch of the Department of Public Health now will approve individual facilities to operate much like the MPU. They will approve processing facilities if they're equal to the MPU. Each food manufacturing plant for poultry will have a state number for its facility. They will go over an initial inspection, an annual inspection, and they have to be equal to the MPU. So they have a separate kill and defeathering area away from evisceration. They have a potable water source. They have the 4 documents that we talked about in the MPU. They have the standard sanitation procedures, the standard operating procedures, the HACCP plan, and a recall plan. They have to have the ability to chill carcasses to less than 40 degrees in 4 hours, and they have to have approved labels and must maintain storage logs of their product. So this is a new wrinkle that has been put in place because of our experiences with the MPU has given the food branch the idea that they can have limited numbers of these facilities and produce it. And with that, the same amount of same places that you can sell the MPU product can be sold from this product as well. So it can go retail, institutions, as well as to other people. And along the way it's the same type of product, but it cannot be sold interstate. I want to close a little bit about producer liability. We talked about the reality of it. Things I'm going to go, because of time, we're going to go right down to the back of it, and the things that you need to do for producer liability. If you're producing a perishable food like meat and eggs, you need to know what the law was, and that was the purpose of this evening. You need to work with producers to understand that they need to protect their assets in regards to keeping their farm, and are there things that they are working so hard to accumulate. They have to have product liability insurance. When we're dealing with product like meat and eggs that are no longer in your control once the consumer buys it, you need to have liability insurance in case something happens. You need to make sure you document all your procedures. Every type of thing you do in processing, raising of the birds should be documented and a record kept. And when you deal with raw materials, you want to document that as well. So if you're buying sanitizers or you're buying feed, anything that goes into that, you want to make sure you're maintaining the documenting your raw products. And if you operate in these type of situations, you want to make sure you have records of your HACCPs, your standard operating procedures, and the standards for sanitation as well. We want to make sure it's properly labeled and you're using the correct terminology. You need to control your inventory. So if you're storing frozen chickens or you're packing eggs for a long time, make sure you're rotating stock and you're controlling, keeping a log at the temperatures at which they're being in. Make sure you maintain your product identity. Don't get product that's lost and you forget how long you've had it. If you're using workers, make sure you educate them. It's always a good idea when you're working with distributors or retailers that you educate them on the proper ways to handle your product and also work with them. And you need to establish a product recall process. And how are you going to be able to contact the people you sold product to is really what the question becomes. So with that, I'm going to end, and I'll let answer anybody's questions.
I'm just unmuting myself here. Just a second. Get my video back on. Okay, we did have one question with regards to the eggs. Corrigan would like to know for advice on labeling if selling unclassified eggs in 6x5 flats.
In 6x5 flats, are they wrapped or not wrapped?
It doesn't say. Let's go with unwrapped.
If they're selling them and they're just laying out there or they're coming in there, they still have to have a label on there. So whether you, it's almost better that you do some type of shrink wrap on them, or even if you put that in a larger plastic bag where you can put the label on it. So like a Ziploc bag.
What if you're selling from farmers markets using the flats, but they're bringing their own?
You need to have a placard that has all the information you would have on the label. So it has to have the producer's name, it has to have their contact information. You have to say that it's sold directly to consumers and that they're unclassified or ungraded. And I would also have them put a Best Buy date on it.
Right. Corrigan also mentions that profit margins for small producers are very limited. Compliance with regulations for one-way packaging consumes a significant portion of that profit. Are there any organizations or cooperative groups that can mass purchase to defray costs?
We have mentioned that to some people, and maybe under the the Kentucky Proud label or something of that, and we've not gotten any traction with it. It's best to, when you look at what the price you can, you should be getting a premium price for your eggs if you're not, if you can. The cartons, eggcartons.com, and those, they are expensive, but at the same time, it is a small portion of it. I like the idea of doing the bulk container and have people come with their own cartons.
I have seen some county extension offices bulk purchase cartons and then sell them to egg producers from the extension office. I can't remember which county was doing that, but one of the ones that I went to give a small flocks talk was doing that. So that is an option for the.
And if you're selling at a farmer market and it's an organized farmer market, you may be able to talk to that farmer's market organization about doing those bulk purchases.
I think that's what they were trying to help, was get eggs to the farmers market in their area. So they were bulk purchasing egg cartons to help reduce the cost for producers in the area.
Yeah.
So as county agents, that is something you may consider helping with. I did put a link to a fact sheet that we did on marketing regulations affecting small scale egg producers in Kentucky. It pretty much summarizes what Tony talked about. It also, there are also fact sheets on factors to consider before starting up a small scale commercial egg production unit in in the state of Kentucky and some things about raising them. Okay. Carol said, you made the comment, I think, even if you do not meet the conditions of the 60 dozen eggs sold in a calendar week, you are still required to follow the guidelines that you mentioned. Is that correct?
That is correct. You are exempt from buying a license is the only exemption you have.
Corrigan, with the selling the eggs in the flats, this was selling them to a local restaurant.
If you are selling them to a local restaurant and they are using them themselves, that is, as long as you're providing them the information, I would just, every time I delivered eggs there, I'd just give them a card. We used to do that when we were selling eggs, is when people bought them, we just gave them a mimeograph sheet that gave them the information.
Okay. So far, I'm not seeing any more questions, and it's almost 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock Central Time. Thank you guys for attending. As I said, this is being recorded. I will put the recording up on YouTube, and I will send you a link to it. If you would like to let your producers view it, you're free to share it with them as well. So thank you, Tony. That was a very good presentation, covered a lot of the material. I'm not seeing any more questions. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Have a good evening.